Colonel Adrian Vance stifled a yawn as he surveyed the crowded reception hall of Kepler 7 space station. After 20 years in military intelligence and diplomatic security, he'd hoped his final assignment before retirement would be something quiet. Instead, here he was, serving as security attaché to Earth's delegation at what might be the most tense interstellar summit in recent history. The cavernous hall buzzed with dozens of species from across the known galaxy, their translators creating a constant background hum beneath the conversations. Negotiations with the Draconian Empire over disputed territories in the Outer Rim had reached a critical point. The massive reptilian delegates from Draconia occupied one corner of the room, their scales gleaming under the ambient lighting, eyes constantly scanning for weakness. "Colonel, remember to stay visible but unobtrusive," Ambassador Chinwelu murmured as she passed by, heading toward a cluster of delegates from the Serenian Alliance. "The Draconians respect military presence, but we don't want to appear aggressive." Adrian nodded sharply, adjusting his formal Earth Forces uniform. The Serenian Alliance, a coalition of smaller, technologically advanced species known for their trading prowess, might be Earth's best chance at countering Draconian territorial aggression. While Earth had the military muscle, the Serenians had the technological edge and strategic locations that could tip the balance of power. He watched as Ambassador Chan approached the Serenian delegation, particularly focusing on their lead representative. Ambassador Ilera was a Xylan, the founding species of the Serenian Alliance. Standing barely 3 feet tall, with delicate lavender skin and oversized silver eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, she presented a striking contrast to the hulking Draconians across the room. Despite her diminutive stature, Ilera commanded attention, her ornate silver and blue diplomatic robes flowing as she gestured animatedly during conversations. Adrian had read her file extensively, graduate of the prestigious Galactic Diplomatic Academy with highest honors. Known for brilliance in multi-party negotiations, somewhat eccentric but deeply respected across species boundaries. Her people, the Xylans, were rumored to possess the most advanced AI systems in the known galaxy. His strategic assessment was interrupted by a ripple of movement through the crowd. Ambassador Ilera had broken away from her delegation and was approaching a shipping crate that had been temporarily placed near one of the refreshment tables. Adrian tensed, watching as the small alien diplomatically climbed atop the crate, now elevated to roughly the height of a human adult. She scanned the room briefly, silver eyes reflecting the overhead lights, then gestured urgently to one of her aides. After a brief consultation, both Xylans looked directly at Adrian. He maintained his composed stance as Ambassador Ilera, still standing on her crate, began moving through the crowd toward him, her aide following closely behind. The gathering parted naturally for her, conversations pausing as delegates noticed the unusual procession. "Colonel Vance," she called out as she approached, her translator rendering her high-pitched native language into clear, lightly accented standard English. "Would you be so kind as to approach? I find myself in need of your assistance." Adrian moved forward cautiously, glancing briefly at Ambassador Chun, who gave a subtle nod of approval. As he came to stand before Ambassador Ilera's crate, he noted they were now exactly at eye level with each other. Her silver eyes examined him with undisguised curiosity. "Colonel, I understand you are the tallest individual in the Earth delegation," she stated, a small smile playing across her purple lips. "I believe that's correct, Ambassador," Adrian replied formally, wondering where this was heading. "Excellent. I wish to perform the traditional Xylan diplomatic greeting with your delegation, and it would be most proper to do so with the—" She conferred briefly with her aide in their native tongue, "most vertically advantaged representative." She smiled more broadly now, revealing small, pearl-like teeth. Adrian maintained his diplomatic poise. "I would be honored to receive your traditional greeting, Ambassador." What happened next occurred so quickly Adrian had no time to react. Ambassador Ilera leaned forward on her crate, placed her small, four-fingered hands lightly on his shoulders, and pressed her lips gently against his forehead in what was unmistakably a kiss. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled dignitaries. Adrian remained perfectly still, decades of training helping him maintain his composure despite his confusion. Ambassador Ilera stepped back, looking pleased. There, the connection of peaceful intentions has been established between our peoples. She nodded formally, as if nothing unusual had occurred. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of a glass shattering. One of the junior Earth diplomats had dropped her champagne flute, her face pale with shock. Adrian noticed several of the Draconian delegates were making a sound that might have been laughter, while others were hurriedly conferring with their translators. Ilera's aide, a slightly taller Xylan with deeper blue skin, suddenly looked horrified. He quickly whispered something to Ilera, whose large silver eyes widened in apparent alarm. She turned back to Adrian, opening her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by the arrival of Ambassador Chun and her senior staff. Colonel Vance, Ambassador Ilera, I believe we should continue this exchange in private, Chun said tightly, her diplomatic smile firmly in place but strain evident in her voice. Perhaps the Northeastern Conference Room would be suitable? 10 minutes later, Adrian stood rigidly at attention in the conference room as both delegations' senior staff argued around him. Ilera sat perched on a raised chair brought specifically for her, looking increasingly uncomfortable. This is unprecedented, Deputy Ambassador Jackson from Earth was saying, his face flushed. There wasn't any mention of this ritual in the cultural briefings. Ilera's aide, who had introduced himself as diplomatic attaché Thalen, spread his four-fingered hands apologetically. The ritual of first contact peace bonding is so fundamental to our culture that we sometimes forget others may not be familiar with its significance. Significance? Ambassador, Chen asked carefully. Perhaps you could clarify exactly what Ambassador Ilera's gesture means in your culture. Thalen glanced at Ilera, who nodded almost imperceptibly. He cleared his throat, or made the Xylan equivalent of that noise. According to our most ancient laws, predating even our spaceflight era, when a Xylan of diplomatic rank bestows the forehead kiss upon a representative of another society, it constitutes a formal declaration of, he paused, consulting his translator, lifelong binding partnership. The room fell silent. Binding partnership, Adrian repeated slowly. As in, marriage, Ambassador Ilera said directly, meeting his eyes, or your closest equivalent, an engagement at minimum until formalized. I must apologize for my oversight. In my enthusiasm to honor your delegation with our oldest tradition, I failed to consider the cross-cultural implications. Several of the Earth diplomats began speaking at once. Adrian tuned them out, focusing instead on Ilera's expression. Despite her apology, he didn't detect genuine regret in those silver eyes, more like calculation, and perhaps a hint of amusement. This is outrageous, Deputy Jackson was saying. Surely this can be undone through some diplomatic protocol? Thalen looked genuinely shocked. Undone? The peace bond is our most sacred tradition. To suggest invalidating it would be. He trailed off, clearly struggling to find words extreme enough. An insult of the highest order, Ilera finished for him. One that would certainly end any possibility of alliance between our peoples. Though her words were dire, Adrian noticed she delivered them with remarkable calm. Ambassador Chun placed her hands flat on the conference table. I suggest we take a brief recess to consider the implications. Colonel Vance, might I have a word with you privately? In an adjacent room, Chun paced while Adrian stood at parade rest. This is either the most ridiculous diplomatic incident I've ever encountered or the most brilliant maneuver I've seen in decades, she muttered. Ambassador, Chun stopped pacing. Think about it, Adrian. The Serenians have been cautious about fully committing to an alliance against the Draconians. Suddenly, their lead ambassador creates an unbreakable bond with our military representative that can't be broken without grave insult. This puts us on the same side of the table in a way that can't be easily undone. Adrian frowned. You think she did this deliberately? I'm not certain, Chen admitted. But either way, we need to play along for now. I'll consult with Earth Central, but until we have clear directions, you're to treat this arrangement as a delicate diplomatic reality. Be cordial, respectful, but reveal nothing sensitive. Clear? Yes, Ambassador. And Adrian? Try to find out what her angle is. If there is one. When they returned to the conference room, most of the staff had been dismissed. Only Alara, Phelan, and 2 Earth diplomats remained. Ambassador Chen quickly arranged for everyone else to leave, citing the need for intimate diplomatic dialogue befitting the new connection between our peoples. Soon, only Adrian, Chun, Alara, and Phelan remained. Alara suggested that perhaps she and the colonel should have a moment to become acquainted, given their new status. Ambassador Chun agreed with surprising readiness, though she instructed Adrian with her eyes to remember his duty. And so Adrian found himself in yet another side room, alone with a 3-foot-tall alien who had, through a bizarre cultural misunderstanding or possibly a calculated political move, just become his fiancée. Alara needed Phelan's assistance to climb onto a table so they could speak at eye level. Once her aide had left, she looked at Adrian with an expression that seemed apologetic, but with that same hint of calculation he'd noticed earlier. I sincerely regret the awkwardness of our situation, Colonel Vance, she began. I assure you, while the ritual is indeed deeply significant in my culture, there are diplomatic protocols for managing such cross-species arrangements. Adrian crossed his arms. Were you aware of the implications when you kissed me, Ambassador? Alara's lavender skin darkened slightly around her cheekbones. A blush, perhaps? I was not unaware, she admitted. But my actions were not purely calculated. The greeting is genuine, and it is traditionally performed with the most impressive representative of another society. You were the clear choice. Impressive. Adrian couldn't help but ask. You have the bearing of someone who has seen much, decided much, and regretted little, she said simply. Also, you are quite tall. Despite himself, Adrian felt a smile tug at his lips. So where do we go from here, Ambassador? Alara, please. If we are to be bond partners in the eyes of my people, formality seems excessive. She leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. I recognize that this situation is unusual, but I believe we might use it to mutual advantage. The Draconians respect only power and unbreakable alliances. Our apparent bond creates the impression of just such an alliance between our peoples. A diplomatic fiction? Adrian asked. A diplomatic opportunity, she corrected. I propose we maintain the appearance of this bond during the summit. It would strengthen both our positions against draconian pressure. My people gain the implicit backing of Earth's military might. Your people gain access to our technological innovations and strategic outposts. Adrian studied her closely. Despite her small stature and delicate features, there was nothing childlike about Alara. Her silver eyes held intelligence, determination, and something else he couldn't quite identify. And after the summit, Alara waved a 4-fingered hand dismissively. There are provisions for dissolving interspecies bonds when the parties return to their respective territories. No permanent commitment would be required. She paused, then added, unless you find yourself charmed beyond reason by my intellectual prowess and lavender complexion. The slight upturn at the corner of her mouth suggested humor. Adrian couldn't help but chuckle. Quite the proposal, Ambassador, Alara. She tilted her head. Is that acceptance, Colonel? Adrian, he corrected. And yes, it appears we're engaged. For now. News of the unexpected diplomatic bond between the Earth and Serenian representatives spread through Kepler 7 like wildfire. The Draconian delegation made little attempt to hide their derision, their lead negotiator making pointed comments about desperate alliances and unconventional diplomacy during the next day's session. Other species reacted with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, or amusement. The Altarian delegation sent elaborate crystal flowers to both parties. The Nephthalites requested a formal explanation of human Xylan compatibility for their xenobiology archives. For Adrian, the following days became an exercise in constant vigilance and adaptive protocol. As Alera's bond partner, he was expected to accompany her to various diplomatic functions, stand beside her during key negotiations, and generally play the role of devoted fiancé to an alien half his height. Earth Central had responded to Ambassador Chen's urgent communique with surprising pragmatism, maintain the charade, gather intelligence on Serenian capabilities, and use the unusual alliance to pressure the Draconians into territorial concessions. Adrian's orders were explicit: protect Earth's interests while preventing any diplomatic incident that might offend the Serenians. 4 days after the fateful kiss, Adrian escorted Alera to a cultural exchange event. She wore an elaborate silver headdress that added several inches to her height, and a flowing blue dress that somehow managed to look both regal and practical. Adrian had become accustomed to the strange looks they received: a 6'2" human military officer and a 3-foot Xylan diplomat, walking side by side through the station's corridors. "Your Ambassador Chun is quite adept at leveraging our situation," Alera commented as they approached the event hall. The trade concessions she extracted from the Canalorian delegation this morning were impressive. "She's had 30 years of diplomatic experience," Adrian replied, "though I believe she was equally impressed by your handling of the draconian objections to the security protocol." Alera's silver eyes gleamed with satisfaction. They expected me to concede on automated scanning of their delegation's quarters. They underestimate both my resolve and my understanding of their hidden surveillance technology. Over the past days, Adrian had discovered that beyond her diplomatic skills, Alera possessed a keen analytical mind and a surprisingly sharp sense of humor. Their conversations had evolved from stilted diplomatic exchanges to genuine discussions about security protocols, cultural differences, and occasionally personal perspectives. "The Draconians have been unusually quiet today," Adrian observed as they entered the reception. "I would have expected more opposition to the Serenian proposals on the Outer Rim monitoring stations." Alera nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, their acquiescence was too easy. Either they found another angle of attack, or—" She stopped abruptly, her four-fingered hand tightening on Adrian's arm. "Something's wrong." Before Adrian could ask what she meant, the station's lighting flickered briefly. A moment later, the environmental alarms in the Serenian delegation's section began to wail. "The life support systems," Alera said, alarm evident in her voice despite her composed expression. "My delegation's atmospheric requirements." Adrian didn't wait for her to finish. Years of security training kicked in as he activated his communicator. "Security breach in Serenian quarters. Potential life support tampering. I need a full response team and emergency atmospheric regulation, now." The next hours passed in controlled chaos. The Serenian delegation had been evacuated to emergency bioadaptable chambers. Kepler Station security teams discovered that the life support systems for the Serenian section had been subtly reprogrammed to gradually decrease oxygen levels while increasing nitrogen compounds toxic to Xylan physiology. A malfunction, obviously, the head of station security concluded in his report to the assembled diplomatic corps. Possibly due to a translation error in the environmental requirements provided by the Serenian delegation. Adrian watched Alera's face during this explanation. Her expression remained diplomatically neutral, but he could see the tightness around her silver eyes. Later, in the privacy of Adrian's security office, Alera paced on his desk, the only surface high enough for a proper conversation. "That was no malfunction," she stated flatly. "The environmental system was deliberately tampered with. The alterations were too precise, too specific to Xylan vulnerabilities." Adrian nodded grimly. "I agree. The question is who, and whether they were targeting your entire delegation or specifically you." Alera stopped pacing. "You believe I might have been the primary target? Since our arrangement, you've become the public face of a strengthening Earth-Serenian alliance. If someone wanted to disrupt those negotiations..." Adrian left the implication hanging. "The Draconians are the obvious suspects," Alera said thoughtfully, "but perhaps too obvious. They prefer direct confrontation to subterfuge." "Usually," Adrian agreed, "but there are other possibilities. Not everyone in my delegation is pleased with our sudden closeness to the Serenian alliance. And I understand your coalition has internal factions as well. Alera's silver eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting, Adrian? I'm suggesting we can't trust anyone completely, not even our own people, until we know more. He hesitated, then added, I'm also suggesting that whatever diplomatic fiction we're maintaining might have very real consequences. Alera was silent for a moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on the surface of his desk. Finally, she looked up, decision clear in her expression. Then we should investigate, you and I, quietly, without involving our respective security teams who might be compromised. Adrian raised an eyebrow. You trust me enough for that. A small smile curved her purple lips. Strangely, I find that I do. Besides, if you wish me harm, you could have simply delayed the emergency response today. That night, long after most of the station had cycled to sleep mode, Adrian met Alera at an unused maintenance junction near the central core. She wore a simple gray technician's uniform adapted to her size, making her look more like maintenance staff than a senior diplomat. I accessed the environmental control logs, she whispered as they made their way through narrow utility corridors. The tampering originated from a terminal in Section 47B. The neutral zone between delegations, Adrian murmured. Smart. Difficult to attribute to any particular group. They moved silently through the station's service areas, avoiding security patrols and automated monitoring systems. Adrian was impressed by Alera's agility despite her small stature and by her obvious familiarity with station systems. You seem quite comfortable navigating restricted areas, he commented as she bypassed a security lock with remarkable ease. Diplomatic training includes many practical skills, she replied with a hint of mischief in her voice, particularly for representatives of species often underestimated due to size. They reached the terminal in question, a seldom-used maintenance access point in a quiet corridor. Alera immediately set to work, her fingers moving rapidly over the interface. The credentials used to access the environmental systems were valid, she said, frowning. Security level Gamma, registered to. Her silver eyes widened. A member of the Earth delegation. Adrian leaned closer, examining the identification code. That's Ambassador Chin's executive assistant, Marcus Finch. Alera looked up at him. Do you believe he would act against the Alliance? Adrian shook his head slowly. I've known Marcus for years. He's ambitious but not reckless, and he has no special knowledge of Xylan physiology. He studied the log entries more carefully. Wait, these access timestamps don't match station activity records. Marcus was in a full delegation meeting when these changes were implemented. His credentials were used, but not by him. They continued digging through system logs, following the digital trail backward. Adrian used his security clearance to access personnel movement records, while Alera employed what she called standard diplomatic information gathering techniques, which looked suspiciously like high-level hacking, to correlate the data. There, she said suddenly, pointing to a series of access attempts preceding the successful breach. These failed attempts have a different signature. The approach is, she hesitated, reminiscent of draconian security protocol, but with anomalies. Adrian frowned. Intentional anomalies, perhaps, to make it look draconian while maintaining plausible deniability. A soft noise from the corridor outside froze them both. Adrian gestured for silence, moving to a position where he could see the corridor while remaining hidden. A figure moved past their location, tall, humanoid, but definitely not human. Even in the dim light, the distinctive ridged profile of a draconian was unmistakable. But what was more surprising was the second figure that followed close behind, unmistakably human, wearing the uniform of Earth's diplomatic security force. Adrian waited until they had passed before returning to Alera. We have company, a draconian and one of my own security team, moving together. Alera's expression darkened. This suggests collusion at a level beyond what either of us suspected. We need to copy these logs and get out of here, Adrian said, suddenly acutely aware of their vulnerable position. As Alera quickly downloaded the evidence, The station's general alarm system suddenly activated, red emergency lights pulsing along the corridors. Security alert, Section 47B, announced the station's automated system. Unauthorized access detected. All personnel, initiate lockdown protocol. Adrian cursed under his breath. They've spotted us. We need to move now. Alara finished the download, tucking the data device into a hidden pocket. The nearest exit is compromised. Adrian interrupted, grabbing her hand. We use the maintenance shafts. What followed was a desperate race through the station's infrastructure. Adrian boosted Alara into ventilation ducts too small for him to follow, forcing them to separate and reunite at junction points. They evaded 2 security patrols by hiding in waste reclamation chambers. At one point, Adrian had to carry Alara across a gap in the flooring where maintenance was underway, her small body pressed against his chest as he jumped the 3-meter span. Finally, they reached a seldom-used observation deck, temporarily closed for renovations. Breathless and tense, they huddled behind stacked construction materials, listening for pursuit. I think we lost them, Adrian whispered after several minutes of silence. In the dim emergency lighting, Alara's silver eyes seemed to glow faintly. For now, she agreed. But we cannot return to our quarters. They'll be watching. Adrian nodded grimly. We need to get this evidence to someone we can trust, but I'm no longer certain who that might be. Alara suddenly looked very tired, her small shoulders slumping slightly. The implications are troubling. If elements within both our delegations are working together against the Alliance, it suggests a deeper conspiracy, Adrian finished for her, one that might extend beyond this summit. They fell silent, the magnitude of their discovery settling over them. Through the viewport beyond their hiding place, the vast sweep of stars was visible, cold and distant. It seems our diplomatic fiction has become rather more complicated, Alara said finally, a wry note in her voice despite their situation. Adrian found himself smiling in response. Indeed, not the straightforward engagement either of us anticipated. Their eyes met in the dimness, and something shifted in the space between them. Whether from the adrenaline of their escape or the sudden intimacy of shared danger, Adrian became acutely aware of Alara not as an alien diplomat or a political ally, but simply as herself, brave, brilliant, and unexpectedly compelling. Your forehead is bleeding, she said softly, reaching up to touch a spot above his eyebrow, where he must have struck something during their flight. Her four-fingered hand was cool against his skin, the touch gentle and somehow both alien and familiar at once. Without thinking, Adrian placed his hand over hers, holding it against his face for a moment longer than necessary. Alara didn't pull away. Instead, her silver eyes searched his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. I find myself experiencing an unanticipated development, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What's that? Adrian asked, equally quiet. I'm beginning to suspect that our pretend engagement might be affecting my actual emotional processes in ways I had not accounted for in my original diplomatic calculations. A laugh escaped Adrian, soft but genuine. I believe I'm experiencing similar unanticipated developments. Alara tilted her head, a gesture he'd come to recognize as both thoughtful and slightly amused. How inconvenient for both of us. Terribly inconvenient, he agreed, still holding her hand. For a moment, neither moved. Then, in a synchronicity that seemed to surprise them both, they leaned toward each other. This kiss was nothing like the ceremonial one that had started their charade. It was tentative, questioning, and entirely real. When they separated, Alara's lavender complexion had darkened noticeably, and Adrian suspected his own face was equally flushed. Well, she said after a moment, her usual composure slightly rattled. That will certainly complicate our investigation. Or motivate it, Adrian replied. I find I'm now even more determined to discover who might be trying to harm you. She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her alien features into something Adrian found unexpectedly beautiful. Then let us proceed with our investigation, partner. Both diplomatic and otherwise. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Adrian's secure communicator vibrating with an incoming message. He checked it cautiously, then frowned. It's from Deputy Liaison Roberts in my delegation. He's requesting an urgent meeting. Says he has information about irregularities in diplomatic protocols and mentions Marcus Finch specifically. Alara considered this. It could be genuine, or a trap. Only one way to find out, Adrian said grimly. But we'll approach with caution. They arranged to meet Roberts in one of the station's public gardens, open, well-lit, and monitored by station security. Adrian arrived first, positioning himself with clear sight lines and multiple exit routes. Alara entered separately, appearing to casually examine the exotic plants while actually establishing a secondary observation position. Roberts arrived punctually, alone as promised. A thin, nervous man with a reputation for bureaucratic precision, he seemed genuinely distressed. Colonel Vance, thank you for meeting me, he began without preamble. I've discovered something troubling about internal communications within our delegation. Adrian maintained a neutral expression. Go on. Marcus Finch has been sending encrypted transmissions outside normal diplomatic channels. I only noticed because one was misdirected to my terminal due to a routing error. Roberts lowered his voice. The partial message I saw referenced neutralizing the Serenian advantage and maintaining leverage through controlled disruption. Adrian felt a chill. Did you report this to Ambassador Chun? Roberts paled slightly. That's the other problem. Some of the transmissions were directed to the ambassador's private channel, but I have reason to believe she never received them. They were intercepted. By whom? I don't know for certain, but Roberts never finished his sentence. A soft buzzing sound filled the air, and he suddenly clutched his throat, eyes widening in panic. He collapsed to the garden floor, convulsing. Adrian rushed to him, shouting for medical assistance, but one look at Robert's rapidly bluing face told him it was too late. A targeted toxin, almost certainly. Alara appeared at his side, her expression grim. We need to leave now. Whoever did this is watching. They barely made it out of the garden before security sealed the area. The station erupted into chaos as news of a medical emergency spread, quickly escalating to rumors of assassination when Roberts was pronounced dead at the scene. Using the confusion to their advantage, Adrian and Alara made their way to a secure communication room used for confidential diplomatic transmissions. With her technical skills and his security clearance, they managed to bypass the safeguards and access the station's main communication array. We need to broadcast what we know, Alara said as she worked to establish a secure connection to the station's public announcement system. The evidence about the environmental sabotage, the suspicious transmissions, all of it. Adrian nodded, keeping watch on the corridor outside. Agreed, but we need to be precise. Accusations this serious against members of multiple delegations could destabilize the entire summit if handled poorly. They worked quickly to compile their evidence into a clear, factual presentation. As they did, Adrian noticed a pattern emerging from the data they'd gathered. These communication signatures, he said suddenly, they don't match standard Earth or draconian protocols. There's a third party involved. Alara examined the data, her silver eyes widening. You're right. The encryption method has markers consistent with. By the first star. She looked up at Adrian in shock. These are Vex protocols. Vex? I'm not familiar with them. Few are. They're a shadow organization, rumored to have ties to weapons development and technological black markets. They operate across species boundaries, with agents in multiple governments. Alara's voice was tight with concern. If they're involved in sabotaging these negotiations, then this is bigger than a territorial dispute, Adrian finished. This is about preventing any alliance that might threaten their operations. Their discovery added new urgency to their work. As they finalized their presentation, the door to the communication room suddenly sealed shut with a hiss of hydraulics. Security override engaged, announced the station's automated system. Containment protocol activated. Adrian tried his override codes to no effect. We're locked in. Alara moved to a secondary console. This was a deliberate isolation. Someone knows we're here and what we're doing. On the main view screen, the face of Marcus Finch appeared, his usual affable expression replaced by cold determination. Colonel Vance, Ambassadeur Ilara. I'm afraid I can't allow you to continue this misguided investigation. Adrian moved protectively closer to Alara. Marcus, I suspected you might be involved after what Roberts told us. Before you had him killed. Finch's expression didn't change. Roberts was unfortunate collateral damage, as you both will be if you persist. The Vex Consortium has investments throughout this sector that would be jeopardized by a strong Earth-Serenian alliance. Surely you understand it's nothing personal. Betraying your own species for profit seems rather personal, Adrian replied coldly. Finch smiled thinly. Species loyalty is such an outdated concept, Colonel. The Vex operates beyond such limitations. We have representatives from a dozen worlds in our organization. Even, he nodded toward Alara, some Xylan's ambassador, though obviously not those with your traditional values. Alara's voice was steel. You orchestrated everything. The environmental sabotage, framing the Draconians, even our supposed engagement through cultural manipulation. Finch actually laughed. The engagement was an unexpected bonus. It accelerated alliance talks in ways we hadn't anticipated, forcing us to take more direct action. His expression hardened. Now, I'm afraid our conversation must end. The communication room you're in will shortly experience a catastrophic pressure failure. A tragic accident that will be blamed on Draconian sabotage, further destabilizing the summit. Diplomatic chaos serves our purposes quite well. The screen went black, and immediately warning lights began flashing throughout the room. Atmospheric decompression sequence initiated, announced the computer. Evacuation advised. Seal failure in 3 minutes. Alara was already at the main control panel, her fingers flying over the interface. He's overridden the safety protocols. I can't stop the decompression from here. Adrian examined the sealed door. We need to get a message out before this room breaches. Even if we can't save ourselves, we can expose the conspiracy. There's an emergency broadcast override, Alara said, moving to a different console. It bypasses normal communication protocols in case of station-wide emergencies. Can you access it? Not easily, but her silver eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. Your security clearance combined with my diplomatic codes might provide the necessary override. They worked furiously, racing against the countdown. At 30 seconds remaining, they succeeded in activating the emergency broadcast system. This is Colonel Adrian Vance and Ambassador Alara. Adrian spoke clearly into the pickup. We have evidence of a conspiracy by an organization called the Vex Consortium to sabotage the Peace Summit. Marcus Finch of the Earth delegation is their agent. All delegates are in danger. The evidence is being transmitted on this frequency now. Alara initiated the data transfer, pushing through everything they had discovered. The environmental sabotage, the falsified communications, Robert's murder, and the Vex connection. Decompression in 10 seconds, warned the computer. Adrian looked at Alara, reaching for her hand. I'm sorry our engagement is ending this way. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. As am I. It was becoming rather more than a diplomatic fiction. 5 seconds. They braced for the fatal breach, holding tightly to each other. The countdown reached 0, and nothing happened. The warning lights stopped flashing, and the room's ventilation system resumed normal operation. Decompression sequence aborted, announced the computer. Security override initiated by Central Command. The door slid open to reveal Ambassador Chun, flanked by station security officers. Colonel Vance, Ambassador Alara, Chun said, relief evident in her voice. Your broadcast was received throughout the station. Marcus Finch has been detained while attempting to board a shuttle. The Draconian delegation is cooperating fully in identifying Vex agents among their staff. The following days were a whirlwind of security debriefings, emergency diplomatic sessions, and restructured negotiations. The exposure of the Vex conspiracy sent shockwaves through the summit, but also created unexpected common ground between previously adversarial delegations. Marcus Finch and 3 other identified Vex agents were held in station security pending transfer to their respective authorities. The Draconian Empire, embarrassed by the infiltration of their delegation, suddenly became much more amenable to reasonable territorial concessions. The Serenian Alliance's position was strengthened by their clear victimization in the sabotage attempts. In the aftermath, Adrian and Alara found themselves celebrated as heroes throughout the station. Their quick thinking and bravery had not only exposed a dangerous conspiracy, but potentially saved countless lives across multiple species. The diplomatic engagement that had begun as an accident, or perhaps a calculated move, was now the talk of the summit for entirely different reasons. 2 days after the crisis, Adrian was summoned to Ambassador Chen's private office. She greeted him with uncharacteristic warmth. "Colonel Vance, I've received new directives from Earth Central. In light of your actions, you're being offered a promotion and a position as Earth's permanent liaison to the Serenian Alliance. It would mean extended service, of course, but with considerable diplomatic authority." Adrian absorbed this news with mixed emotions. After 20 years in service, he'd been looking forward to retirement. Yet the events of the past week had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose he'd thought long faded. "The Serenians have made a similar offer to Ambassador Alara," Chen continued, watching him closely. "A permanent posting as their representative to Earth. The first of its kind." Adrian's pulse quickened despite his attempts at professional detachment. Has she accepted? Chen's lips curved in a knowing smile. "She requested time to consider. As did I, on your behalf." She leaned forward slightly. "Adrian, off the record, this arrangement between you and Ambassador Alara. I know it began as a diplomatic necessity, but it's become evident to everyone that there's something more genuine developing. Earth Central is not discouraging this. In fact, they see potential advantages in a more permanent alliance." Adrian felt a flash of indignation. "With all due respect, Ambassador, my personal relationships aren't diplomatic bargaining chips." "Of course not," Chen agreed smoothly. "I'm merely observing that, should you choose to pursue this connection with Ambassador Alara, there would be no official obstacles." She paused. "In fact, there might be official support." Later that evening, Adrian met Alara in one of the station's observation lounges. The room was deserted at this late hour, offering a panoramic view of the glittering star field beyond. Alara sat on a specially raised seat that brought her close to Adrian's eye level when he sat beside her. "Ambassador Chen offered me a permanent posting to the Serenian Alliance," he said without preamble. Alara nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight. "And Diplomatic Director Thalen offered me a permanent position on Earth." A small smile played across her purple lips. "It seems our superiors are eager to capitalize on our special relationship. Does that bother you?" Adrian asked carefully. She considered this, her head tilted in that characteristic way he'd come to find endearing. "It would, if the relationship were still merely a diplomatic fiction. But I find myself uncertain if that accurately describes our current situation." Adrian felt his heart beat faster. "I'm equally uncertain." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars. "I've been studying Earth's customs regarding pair bonding," Alara said finally. "They seem considerably more complex than Xylan traditions." Adrian chuckled. "I suppose they can be. Yet the essential element appears consistent across our species. The choice to commit oneself to another, regardless of differences or challenges." She turned to face him fully. "Is that a fair assessment?" "Very fair," Adrian agreed, suddenly aware of how much her opinion had come to matter to him in such a short time. Alara reached into a pocket of her ceremonial robe and withdrew a small object, an intricate crystal pendant suspended on a chain of some silvery metal. "In my culture, when a bond is to be formalized rather than merely declared, the initiator presents a creation of their own, making to their chosen partner." She held it out to him, the crystal catching the starlight and refracting it into countless tiny rainbows. I made this for you. The crystal is from my homeworld, the setting fashioned from an alloy I developed myself. It's designed to be worn comfortably by a human. Adrian took it carefully, turning it in his fingers. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the crystal seeming to hold galaxies within its facets. It contains a quantum resonance pattern, Elara continued, a hint of nervousness in her voice. Tuned specifically to match certain brainwave patterns unique to you. It will warm slightly when I am thinking of you, regardless of distance. It's considered rather romantic by my people. Adrian felt a tightness in his throat as he understood what she was offering. Not a diplomatic arrangement, not a strategic alliance, but a genuine bond, one that crossed the vast differences between their species and backgrounds. I'm afraid I don't have anything of equal craftsmanship to offer in return, he said softly. Alara's expression softened. Among humans, I understand the traditional offering is often a ring, but that would be impractical given the difference in our digit structures. Her four-fingered hand briefly touched his five-fingered one. Adrian thought for a moment, then reached for the insignia pin on his uniform collar, a small silver star that represented his rank and years of service. This isn't something I made, he said, detaching it carefully, but it represents who I am and what I've done with my life. He offered it to her. I'd be honored if you would accept it. Elara took the pin with evident emotion, her silver eyes shimmering. Does this mean? It means I'm asking you a question, Adrian replied, smiling. Not as Colonel Vance to Ambassador Elara, but simply as Adrian to Elara. Would you consider making our engagement real? Not for diplomatic advantage or political alliance, but because I've come to care for you in a way I never expected. Her lavender complexion darkened with emotion. I would consider it most favorably, she said, then laughed softly. That is yes. My answer is yes. Their second kiss was as different from their first as their current relationship was from its beginning. No audience, no political calculation, just a simple connection between two beings who had found something unexpected and precious in each other. As they separated, Alara's expression grew more serious. There are practical considerations. Our physiological differences, the environments we naturally inhabit, the distance between our worlds. Adrian nodded. Challenges, certainly, but perhaps no greater than those we've already faced together. He gestured toward the stars. The galaxy is becoming smaller every day. Mixed species relationships are no longer as unprecedented as they once were. True, Elara acknowledged. And I have considerable scientific expertise that could be applied to solving environmental compatibility issues. Her eyes twinkled. For example, I've already developed a respiratory supplement that would allow me to function comfortably in Earth's atmosphere indefinitely. Adrian raised an eyebrow. You've been planning ahead. I prefer to think of it as being prepared for promising possibilities, she replied with dignity, though her smile betrayed her. 2 weeks later, as the summit drew to a close, Adrian and Elara stood together at the docking bay where the Earth delegation would soon depart. Both had accepted their new diplomatic postings, though their future plans extended far beyond official duties. Ambassador Chen approached them, datapad in hand. The final treaty has been ratified. The Draconians have agreed to all major concessions regarding the Outer Rim territories. The Serenian Alliance will oversee the monitoring stations, with Earth providing security guarantees. She allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction, a considerable diplomatic victory due in no small part to your efforts, both official and unofficial. She handed Adrian a small data crystal. Your new orders, Colonel. You'll be reporting to the Serenian Embassy on Earth for 6 months of cultural orientation before relocating to their home system as our permanent representative. Thank you, Ambassador, Adrian said formally, though his attention was already drifting back to Elara, who stood beside him practically vibrating with excitement. I have news, Elara said once Chun had departed. Diplomatic Director Thalen has approved my proposal for a joint research initiative. Her silver eyes gleamed with enthusiasm. We've been granted use of a decommissioned Serenian scout vessel, reconfigured for deep space exploration, with environmental systems compatible with both our physiologies. Adrian raised an eyebrow. A ship of our own? Indeed. The second chance. Alara's smile widened. Officially, we'll be mapping potential diplomatic outposts in the uncharted regions beyond the Perseus Arm. Unofficially, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. We'll have considerable autonomy to explore as we see fit, while maintaining our official duties via subspace communications. You've thought of everything, Adrian said, not bothering to hide his admiration. I try to be thorough, she replied with mock primness. Now, shall we go examine our new vessel? I've had the command chair specially modified to accommodate your excessive height. Adrian laughed, offering her his arm. Lead the way, Ambassador. Actually, she said, taking his arm, I was thinking we might use different titles for our expedition. Perhaps Captain and Navigator, or simply Alara and Adrian, he suggested. Her expression softened. Yes, I like that best of all. 3 days later, the sleek form of the Second Chance slipped away from Kepler, 7 Station, its course set not for Earth or the Serenian homeworlds, but for the vast, star-filled frontier beyond. On the bridge, Adrian sat in a modified command chair, while Alara operated the navigation controls from a raised platform that put them at eye level. Course set for the Valenius cluster, she reported, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. Estimated travel time, 3 weeks, 2 days, 7 hours. Plenty of time to work on those cultural orientation materials, Adrian observed with a smile. Among other mutual research projects, Alara agreed, her silver eyes twinkling. As the ship accelerated to faster-than-light speed, the stars outside stretched into streaming lines of light. Adrian reached across to take Alara's hand, marveling at how natural it felt despite the difference in their physiology, her 4 slender fingers interlacing perfectly with his 5. To think this all began with you standing on a crate, he said, smiling at the memory. The best adventures often begin with one needing to find a better vantage point, Alara replied philosophically. She squeezed his hand gently. I'm looking forward to seeing where this particular adventure leads us. As long as we're together, Adrian said, I suspect it will be quite the journey. The Second Chance carried them onward into the glittering darkness, 2 unlikely companions who had found in each other something neither had expected but both now treasured, a connection that transcended species, planets, and even the diplomatic incident that had brought them together in the first place. Their story had only just begun.